The first light of dawn crept over the airport, casting long shadows across the empty terminal. It was quiet, peaceful, and cold. Near Gate 37, a man waited alone, calm, still, almost invisible. To most, he looked like just another traveler, simple clothes, no bodyguards, no fanfare. But he was anything but ordinary. This was Ibrahim Traoré, the President of Burkina Faso. He preferred it this way. No cameras, no flashing lights, no noisy entourages, just the people. He had just wrapped up critical diplomatic talks in Europe, meetings about gold, sovereignty, Africa's future, but none of that mattered now. All he wanted was to get home. As he walked toward the Air France flight bound for Ouagadougou, he smiled warmly at an airport worker, greeting them in French. "Bonjour, ça va?" The worker smiled back, unaware of who he was. Exactly how Traoré liked it. He boarded quietly, nodded politely to the flight crew, and took his seat in business class, row 2A by the window. No one paid him any mind, or so he thought. A few rows behind him, trouble was already brewing. A French CEO, head of a powerful energy company, that was furious. His world was red carpets, champagne, and VIP lounges, so when the airline told him business class was full, he didn't accept it, couldn't. At the gate, he paced in polished shoes, flanked by assistants, hissing demands at the airline staff. "I'm a strategic partner in Africa," he snapped, as if that alone should open every door. The airline scrambled, whispered, checked. Business class was still full. But the CEO wasn't used to hearing no. That's when they called Claire, the senior flight attendant. Tall, pale, perfectly pressed, in her Air France uniform, she stepped onto the plane with a mission: find a seat for the VIP. Her sharp eyes scanned the cabin, paused, locked onto 2A, onto a dark-skinned man in a hoodie, sitting quietly. She leaned toward another attendant and muttered under her breath. Probably a mistake. Claire forced a professional smile and approached. "Monsieur, may I see your boarding pass?" she asked. Ibrahim Traoré looked up, calm, and handed it over. Correct seat, correct name, perfectly in order. Still, something about him, or perhaps the idea of him, didn't sit right with her. She returned a moment later, smile tighter, voice firmer. "Sir, I'm sorry. We may need to move you to economy to accommodate another passenger. We'll offer you compensation for the inconvenience." The insult fell between them, quiet but heavy. The storm had begun. Ibrahim Traoré raised an eyebrow, sharp but calm. "And why me?" he asked, voice steady. Claire forced a tight smile. "No reason, sir. Just a small adjustment for our guest." "A guest more important than me?" His voice stayed even, almost gentle, but the weight of the question hung heavy in the air. Claire didn't answer. She only smiled, brittle and uncomfortable. Around them, a few passengers began to glance over, sensing something wrong, but no one spoke. And Traoré? He simply leaned back in his seat and said, "No, I will remain where I am." The tension thickened. Claire stood there, stunned. A man like him, an African man, saying no to her? She wasn't used to that, not on her shift, not from someone like him. Her smile tightened into something colder. "Sir, I insist, this is for operational reasons," she said, voice sharp with bruised pride. Traoré didn't flinch. He met her gaze, steady and unblinking. "If it's operational, explain why I'm being asked, and not anyone else." Claire hesitated. She wasn't ready for calm resistance. Not this kind, not from him. Around them, the cabin grew tense. A man lowered his newspaper. A woman stopped typing on her laptop. The stillness of business class cracked into uneasy silence. Meanwhile, the CEO still lingered at the gate, growing impatient. They couldn't seat him until someone moved, and Claire needed someone to move. She turned on her heel and marched to the cockpit, whispered urgently to the captain, then returned. But this time, she didn't approach Traoré. She picked another black man seated nearby, then another. One by one, anyone who looked like they didn't belong. That was her second mistake. Traoré sat silently, watching, expressionless. But inside he was sharp, observing, calculating, listening. Humiliation didn't anger him, it focused him. A young African man, maybe mid-20s, blinked in confusion as Claire pointed to his seat. "You, sir, we need you to move to economy," the young man asked quietly. "Why me?" Claire didn't answer. She just took his boarding pass. That's when Traoré stood, slowly, deliberately. "Enough," he said. The words weren't loud, but they hit like a hammer. "You are making decisions based on skin, not tickets. That's called discrimination." Claire froze, shaken. "Sir, please," she said, voice cracking slightly. "I'll have to ask you to sit down. Please don't cause a scene." Traoré held her gaze. Steady, unmovable. For a moment Claire's breath caught. There was something about him, something powerful, but she still didn't recognize who he was. To her, he was just another troublemaker. She spun away, fuming. Under her breath in French, she muttered, "These people, always making noise." The CEO was finally brought aboard, escorted like visiting royalty. Claire greeted him with a syrupy smile, offering champagne, adjusting his seat, handing him warm towels. "We're fixing the seating issue, monsieur," she cooed. Meanwhile, Traoré sat back down, fastened his seatbelt, tapped the armrest with calm fingers. He didn't need to argue, he didn't need to shout, because soon the entire world would know exactly what had happened, and exactly who had been insulted. The CEO swept past him without a glance. Claire hovered nearby, lavishing attention. The message was clear: you matter, he does not. The plane taxied down the runway, took off into the sky, left French soil behind, but carried with it a moment that would soon shake two nations. Inside the cabin, everything looked normal. Passengers sipped coffee, read magazines, watched silent movies. The seatbelt signs blinked off, but beneath it all, something invisible churned, something waiting to break. Ibrahim Traoré remained still, silent, unbothered. But the storm had already begun. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't reveal his identity. He simply sat there, calm, like a man watching a movie he already knew the ending to. Meanwhile, Claire avoided looking at him. Something about his presence unsettled her, but she pushed it aside. Mid-flight, she returned to his seat, wearing a thin, strained smile. "Would you like anything to drink, sir?" she asked. He glanced up, unbothered. "Water is fine," he said. She nodded quickly and hurried away. No apology, no courtesy, no respect. The CEO, on the other hand, was treated like a king. Claire laughed at his jokes, leaned in when he spoke, and gushed over his important projects in Africa. He smirked arrogantly. "Burkina Faso is lucky to have us," he said. "We're bringing order to chaos." Claire nodded eagerly, completely unaware that the very man he was insulting sat just 2 rows away. Farther back in the cabin, an African nurse returning home to Bobo Dioulasso watched everything. She shook her head and whispered to her neighbor, "That's our president. They don't even know who they're humiliating." The neighbor's eyes widened, but they stayed silent. Traoré clearly didn't want attention, and no one dared disturb the quiet dignity he carried. Hours passed. The lights dimmed. Passengers slept. But Ibrahim Traoré remained awake, staring out the window at the endless clouds. He wasn't angry. He was patient. And when the wheels touched down in Ouagadougou, that patience would become history. The plane began its slow descent. Cabin lights flickered on. The captain announced their approach in French and English. Passengers stirred, fastening seatbelts, stretching arms. Claire walked briskly down the aisle, clipboard in hand, still flashing warm smiles at the CEO, still ignoring Traoré as if he were invisible. Outside, the view was breathtaking. Golden sunlight spilled over red earth, the city waking beneath them. But what no one inside the plane could yet see was what awaited them on the ground. A convoy had assembled at the airport, black SUVs, military vehicles, A full presidential escort lined up in the morning heat. Inside the cabin, whispers started to spread. "Soldiers, are we landing in a war zone?" one foreigner asked nervously. No, just protocol. Maybe someone important is arriving," another replied. The CEO chuckled smugly and leaned toward Claire. "Must be for me," he said. She laughed, already imagining herself escorting him proudly off the plane. She had even planned to walk him straight through the terminal ahead of the others. But before the plane had even fully stopped, the atmosphere shifted. Out the windows, passengers stared. Presidential guards in crisp uniforms stood at full attention, weapons at their sides. Behind them, ministers of defense, foreign affairs, and security, all standing still under the rising sun, waiting. Claire peeked outside and gasped. What is this?" she whispered. The CEO stood, straightening his expensive jacket, grinning wide. "I told you, big projects," he said. But then heavy boots echoed up the jet bridge. A tall officer in a black beret boarded the plane, his presence commanding the entire cabin's attention. He walked down the aisle slowly, scanning every face. Then he stopped at row 2A. The officer stood tall, brought his hand to his forehead, and snapped into a perfect military salute. "Monsieur le Président, welcome home." The cabin froze. You could hear hearts stop. Claire's face drained of color. Her eyes flicked wildly between the officer and the man she had overlooked, mistreated, ignored. Her hands began to shake. The CEO took a step back, his mouth slightly open. President?" he stammered, voice cracking. Ibrahim Traoré rose slowly from his seat, calm, dignified, not a word spoken. He turned to the CEO, offered him a simple nod, not with anger, not with pride. Just a quiet, undeniable presence. Then he stepped into the aisle, where the officer and the full weight of a nation's honor waited for him. Just a man who no longer needed to say anything. Another officer stepped onto the plane, his face stone cold. He looked directly at Claire and the CEO. "You two will come with us, immediately." "Wait, what?" Claire stammered, her voice cracking. "Why me?" The officer's reply was sharp, without sympathy. "You are being detained for questioning. You have publicly disrespected the head of state on national soil. That is a serious offense." Claire gave a broken, nervous laugh, glancing desperately around for help. No, this must be a mistake. I was just doing my job." But no one listened. Ibrahim Traoré had already stepped off the plane. He was greeted with cheers, salutes, and the outstretched arms of his people. Beyond the airport fence, crowds roared. The nation had seen, the world would soon see. He had walked among them as an ordinary man, and those who judged him by appearance would now face the weight of consequence. Back inside the cabin, stunned passengers watched as Claire and the CEO were handcuffed, their heads lowered, their arrogance shattered. The same hands that had once waved them through luxury now guided them down the steps like criminals. It was only the beginning. The tarmac blazed under the fierce Burkina Faso sun. The two were led separately into black, armored vehicles surrounded by presidential guards. No one spoke to them, not even the officers. The silence was deafening. It was the silence of dignity reclaimed, of a people standing tall. Inside the terminal, President Ibrahim Traoré faced a small crowd of journalists. He stood steady, no anger in his voice, only sharp, unforgettable words. "In Burkina Faso, we do not judge a man's worth by the color of his skin. We do not bow to money. We do not obey old colonial habits. Here, we respect dignity, humanity, and our people. That is the new Africa." The story ignited like wildfire. Footage leaked online, videos of the arrests, photos of the soldiers saluting, clips of the CEO dragged away, no longer a titan, but a small man exposed. Social media erupted. Respect Africa. Skaish stand with Burkina trended across the world. From Lagos to Nairobi to Johannesburg, young Africans celebrated, sharing the story like a badge of honor. Africa was done bowing. At the Ministry of Justice, Claire and the CEO faced formal charges: public insult and discrimination against the head of state, disrespect on Burkinabe soil, abuse of power, attempted intimidation. The French embassy scrambled to intervene. Calls were made, requests were filed, pressure built. But Ibrahim Traoré's answer was firm, clear, unshakable. This is not a colony. This is a sovereign nation. They will face justice like anyone else. Meanwhile, Air France rushed out a clumsy apology, full of cold corporate language and empty regret. It was too late. Burkinabe citizens called for a boycott. Other African nations joined. The damage was done. Locked in a detention center outside Ouagadougou, Claire finally broke down under questioning. Through tears, she sobbed, "I didn't know who he was. I was just following procedures." The investigator stared at her, unmoved. "You didn't need to know who he was," he said coldly. "You only needed to treat him like a human being." The CEO, desperate, tried to leverage influence, to bribe, to threaten. It failed. The court ruled decisively. No immunity, no special treatment. Let justice be equal. And through it all, Ibrahim Traoré never gloated, he never boasted, he simply returned to his work, building roads, empowering youth, strengthening the military, defending the land. But that flight, that moment on the tarmac, became legend. A quiet man in a hoodie, a flight attendant blinded by prejudice, a CEO crippled by pride, and a landing that changed everything.